Hi, and welcome back to Fresh BCSC Tech and BCSC e-learning help. As a part of our summer technology training, this is our final session, which is in its learning tool, focusing on the assessment or the test tool in its learning. So if you wanted to pull up the slides, there is a short link here on this slide. Type that in, you'll have access to this. And we probably won't stay in this slide deck the entire time of this presentation, just so we can go into the platform and actually build tests and practice in there. But it's yours to use if you want to use it. So goals for this session are to learn how to use the test tool for short formative assessments or for lengthier summative assessments, and understand the different ways you can provide students options within a test. So not every single test has to be only multiple choice or only a written response. You can add in multimedia to your test to make them more engaging and more accessible for your students. So what is the test tool on its learning? Well, as the name implies, it is an assessment tool, but there are a variety of question types. There are multiple choice, true, false, matching, fill in the blank, and those are all examples of questions that can be automatically graded by its learning, so the teacher doesn't have to sit there and manually grade those. There are options that provide free response capabilities where the students have to type out a response or record a response or do a video, and those could technically be graded by its learning, but it's a little bit of setup on the teacher's end and is not entirely the most accurate grading system, so those lend themselves a little bit better to grading by the teacher. Plus, there's interactive question types as well, where you can put in pictures and the students click a part of the picture to indicate their answer, or drag and drop manipulatives. You can use this tool for formative assessments. The assessments can be graded by technology or by the teacher, and you can give students the opportunity to take the assessment multiple times until they achieve mastery, or even just redo certain questions depending on how they scored. We can build in these opportunities for students with tests for a couple of different reasons. It gives them an option to check their comprehension and their understanding and to get feedback in a timely manner, especially if you're using the self-grading part of this where it's learning grades it for you. This could be a great way to open a new unit, possibly to kind of gauge students' understanding or their background knowledge on your new unit and your topics of study. It can also be used mid-lesson for a quick check for understanding, so you know, do I need to go back and spend more time on something, or are my students ready to move ahead? You can also include tests in its learning within a learning path on its learning, and depending on how students perform on that test, it can take them to different individualized resources for them based on their performance. Plus, there are a variety of question types within the test tool, so it doesn't have to be a standard, pretty boring test. You can add in multimedia and make it a little bit more enriching for your students. So there are several ways you can go about making tests on its learning. I have linked a tutorial video there, and there's also some screenshots on my next slides. But what I'm going to do is actually take you into the platform and guide you through things there. So my recommendation is that if you're following along with this video, you can follow along in one tab, maybe do split screen mode and have my video playing and have your browser open with its learning so you're following along with me there. Or you can look through the screenshots, pause the video, practice on your own, and then come back to the video as you need it. It is totally up to you. So the first things first, make sure you're signed into its learning and go to your course where you would like to build your assessment, and then click the add button, which is in the top right corner, and select show all, because test doesn't show up in the short list there, and go further down the page, and it's in this group of tools called activities, and it's right below registration, and it's called test. So if you click the test tool, there's a couple of setup pieces that you need to do first. So let's give it a title. And then this next text box is for you to add in an introduction for the test. I think of this as where you would type in instructions for students. So a reminder on maybe what the test is over, how many points it is if you've already determined that, tips for students when they answer questions, or any of your general test expectations that you would typically give students. You can type those out here so it's in a text format. But remember, whenever you see this rich text editor toolbar, that means you have other options. So you can add in links, maybe that has a slideshow of your typical test expectations. I know I used that when I was in the classroom and I'd have it up on the board. You can add in pictures if you want to, an audio recording of you explaining the instructions so students can hear you, or a video of yourself. Below the text box are some additional test settings. If you want to tie any standards that you've loaded into your course, such as state standards, you can add those now. So if I did that, I could select them here, and you would have to load these into your course already. So click, 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 and then select the standards that I want to add. So they're there. If you set mastery, this means that now that I've tied standards to this course, if the students earn mastery, so 80% or better, or less, I guess I kind of get to determine that. If I set mastery on this, that means that they've mastered the standard, and it will red flag that on their profile. It's not necessarily the most useful feature on a test tool, but it's there if you want to use that. You can use a deadline, and this is helpful if you want the test to close at a certain point in time, and it will remain open until that close time. You can select that, and then you can decide if they're allowed to turn it in after the deadline. This is great if you have a student who's absent, perhaps, and they need to be able to take it at a different time. Other options, you can select an assessment scale here. These are all preloaded ones that are loaded into the test environment for all of our itslearning users. Typically, what I would do is I wouldn't do this. I would just do either a score, and then I decide what that score is, or I would just leave that no assessment, because we don't have the grade pass back between itslearning and Power Teacher Gradebook quite up and running yet. It's happening soon, but not quite yet. I wouldn't play around with that feature yet until I can give you a little bit more explanation on the best choice there. And then I would keep it at mandatory by default. And then by default, it puts it as inactive because you're still building your test. You probably don't want students in there trying to take it while you're building it. If you want to have it active from a certain time period during the day, perhaps the class periods where you teach this class, or the time of day you know they're going to be taking it, then you can even get very specific and set that up there so it's only active during those windows of time. If I am good with everything there, I'll click Save. But I'm not actually done with my test settings. I probably shouldn't have gone away from that screen yet. I need to fix a little bit more of my test settings here. So if I click the three-dot button and edit test settings, and you can always go back to this after you've added questions, I want to click Options. And here's where I have even more ways of configuring the settings on my test. So with or without penalty, if you do with penalty, then it takes points away from students from wrong answers. So that means they could potentially get negative points on a test. So I don't typically recommend selecting that one. And then for completion, if you set a threshold score here that they have to get completed a progress report, that means that if you want them to score an 80%, they have to get an 80% before it goes off of their task list. If they don't, then they'll have to retake it. You can do display in random order. That's what you'd like to do. Navigation, this shows how many questions they can see on their screen, or if you want them to be able to flow freely from first question to the 10th question and back. Typically, if you wanted to print your test so that students have the option to take it on paper, you do show all questions on one page. It's much more printer friendly. You can decide how many times students can take the test as well. So if you want them to be able to take it a couple times, you can set that up. And then you decide what attempt counts. So if you want their best attempt to be the one that is kept and the one that will show up in the reports that you generate when you go back to look at student data, this is the one that you would see. If you give them an unlimited amount of time, then it won't lock the test from them after a certain period of time as well. And that's typically what I would recommend there. Unless you want to make it more of a timed test, you can configure the settings. When it says results in feedback, that's immediate feedback, especially if you're using the automated grading feature on this test. So if I do after each attempt, that waits until the whole entire test is finished before it shows them how they performed. If you want to change that, after all attempts means that it's after they've taken it multiple times that it shows them what their results are. So right now they're only allowed to take it twice. They wouldn't know how they did on either one of them until they take it the second time, which could be a little frustrating. So I typically do after each attempt or when the teacher decides. Usually after each attempt is helpful, especially if you're letting them do it multiple times. And then you could decide if you want them to see correct answers, feedback. this is how you want it to look like. You can do feedback after every question, which can be a lot, especially if it's a very lengthy test, or you can do no feedback, which just gives no feedback after each question, but overall feedback at the end. Test security here, we do not have access to test mode browser anymore. That's going away, so you don't have that option anymore, but you could set up requiring a password to take the test. When you finish your settings, you'll click Save, and now it will take you to where you can actually start building your test and your questions. So right now it says the test has no questions, and that's because we haven't had any. So test categories here, this is how you can arrange different types of questions. So the example that they have here linked from itslearning shows like an English language arts test, and how you can group the different questions. And if a question is in a certain category, then it's automatically going to be given that amount of points. So for my example is sometimes when I did a test in my class, the first part of the test would be vocabulary. And then the second part of the test would be historical knowledge and then maybe geographic knowledge. Maybe for my vocab questions, those were 2 points each. So I could flag all of my questions in those categories so that automatically as I'm making those questions and applying those labels, it will put those points there for me and maybe save some more time. But again, you don't have to use that if you don't want to. Questions is where we're going to start adding all the different question types into our test. So if you hover over this drop-down menu, it will show you some question options, but that's not the full list and menu. So if you just click the Add button, it will bring you to the full question building suite of tools on itslearning. So there are some question types that lend themselves better to automatic grading than others. And I'm actually going to go back to my slideshow so I can show you which ones those are. Maybe. All right, here we go. So there are some questions that are easier for the computer to grade on its own and don't take as much time to set up for the teacher in doing this. Those ones are either or questions, multiple choice, multiple response, or select from a list, because you're putting all of the possible answer options out there for your students and they're all spelled correctly, and the students select from a list or from answer options that you have provided. So it's easier for the computer to grade because you're giving them the correct answer output and all the possibilities. Technically, you could set up short answer questions to be automatically graded by itslearning as well and fill in the blank. However, when you set that up, you have to account for all of the possible misspellings of the word and typos and characters and phrases that the students might use, which can be a little lengthy to set up and actually might be a little bit more time effective if you grade those manually yourself. If you set up your itslearning test to have a variety of questions, so maybe the first part of your test is multiple choice, and then the second part of your test is the short answer, then on your test settings, you can set up to where students get feedback after each question so they know how they performed. Or maybe you set it up as 2 separate tests where part 1 of the test is the multiple choice and then part 2 is a short answer, so they at least get the feedback on the multiple choice part before they move on to the other one. What I would do in my learning environment with my students is when I did a test, I would do multiple choice and automatic grading type of test questions is their own test. And then I would do ones that I had to grade on my own time as a separate, it would all be on one test day, but they would be broken up differently. So my students would get some feedback before they saw their final score. There are also interactive questions as well, and those can be automatically graded. But again, there is the possibility where some students who might struggle with keyboarding skills and with mouse skills on their device, where that could kind of hinder their performance and affect them negatively. So if that's not the most age-appropriate thing for your students to be doing, then I maybe would avoid putting those type of questions in there and using the automatic grading for that. Right, so we're going to go back into the platform now. So if I wanted to start making my test, I'll select the question type that I want to use. And over here on the right-hand side, itslearning is wonderful and gives you some tips on ways to write your questions and set them up so it helps your students. And there's even a link for more. So here is where I type out my question. And this is kind of nice because what's there again? The rich text editor, which means my question, I can type out the words, but I can also add an audio recording of me saying the question so that my students have that extra means of representation. They can hear, they can read, and they can see me saying this test question. So that's a really great option If you reuse some of the same tests from semester to semester or year to year, you could build these and then kind of recycle them and tweak them as you go. But you could always have those audio recordings saved so you can just plug and play. So I have my question. I can change my font size and style if I need to as well. And then I can add my audio recording if I wanted. And here is where I select and I input the possible answers for this question. I'll indicate which one's correct. And again, I could put these as pictures. So I could put pictures to represent these answers, or video or audio recordings. All the options are there. I have another option, and I can type that there. Great. And then I'll indicate which one is correct. And I can delete those if I need to. Once I finish typing my question, I can add standards if I want to, if there's different ones that go with this question. And now I get to decide the point value for this question. So I can leave that at 1. What's helpful is I can also preview my question so I can see what students see as well. This is really helpful if you're trying a new question type for the first time and you aren't sure how it looks. So here we go. This is what my students would see, what they'd select. If I'm finished with that, I'll just click back to multiple choice question. All right. If I'm finished editing this question, I want to add another multiple choice question. If I select Save and New, it saves my question here, but then opens up a new multiple choice one for me to start building. If I just click Save, then it takes me back to the questions menu where I can click the Add button again and select a different type of question. So for this one, I'm going to click Add. Brings up all the options, which is an interactive type of question. And a hotspot picture allows you to type a question and then students click on the picture to select their answer. This is really good for finding parts of a cell or diagramming or any really parts of anything. If you're maybe an anatomy teacher or if you're a geography teacher and having them locate things on a map. So for this example, I'm going to pretend like I'm a biology teacher. And I have my question, and then I'll have to upload my picture. I'll do upload and insert if I don't already have it loaded. In this case, I do. And then here, by default, it will scale the picture so that you don't have to be scrolling around. I'll keep that there. And then what I do is I'll indicate here where the correct answer is. And I can resize that if I need to. I can move that around, and it's there. And then down here again, I can add standards if I want to. And I can set the score value, and I'll click Save. And then I can add another type of question. If you were first setting up your hotspot question and it asks you to enable Flash, it's a little frustrating, but you have to click Enable Flash, and then it takes you out of your whole test building, and then you have to go back in and build your hotspot question again. But that's just because it's a feature that's being updated on itslearning and will be fixed soon, but that's why that error message comes up. If you click Add, we can add another question type. And if you do want to do a short answer and have it self-grade, here's how you can do that. Add my question type there. Maybe I'm going to change this to where it's more of a vocab type of question. All right, so I have my question. And then where it says enter an answer key, this is where you would type in all of the possible answers that your students would possibly put in to be counted correct for this answer. So if you do short answer, you're limited on your characters here, as are your students. If you do open answer, then they can type lots of them. So answer key is here. That means it has to be really exact. And if you click this little icon, it will tell you that. What I would typically do is do keywords, and then that kind of looks for certain words in your students' responses and then marks them correct depending on if they have that word. So for the type any misspelling that the students would have, so that they count any misspellings correct as well. And if you do case sensitive, I usually don't check that because it can really detrimentally affect the student's score, even if it's something simple. If you want it to be self-grading, then if you do automated assessment, that uses those keywords there to check for the student's answers. And then if you wanted this to be a certain point amount, you can do more points or less points, and then you'll click save. Save anew opens up another short answer question. So whenever I am finished with my test, if I want to rearrange my questions, I can. I can do move up, move down, and then changes the order. I could delete questions if I wanted to. I can export all of these questions into an Excel file if I need to. I can also import questions as well. If I have questions saved in an Excel file, I can upload them here so I don't have to retype them if I already have some that I've used in the past. I can also copy in questions and tests from other It's Learning tests if I've used them before. Whenever I am finished with my test, it's still not active for my students yet, I would click here to make it active. And now we're going to walk through what it looks like for a student when they take a test on It's Learning that you've created for them. So if I am going to go into student mode, okay, so I'm back and I'm in student mode now. So what I'll do is I'll click start. And I actually logged in as a student on this, but if you use pupil view, it'll give you the same thing. But I did want to show you what the test results look like, so that's why I logged in. So this is the hotspot question, and I would click on the nucleus to get my correct answer. And if you notice here, it's showing me all of the question types, so that's how I set up my test. Right, so I'll click. And it shows me a plus mark, and I can actually move that somewhere else if I want to change my answer if I tap in the wrong place. I'll click there, so I think that's the nucleus. And then first base, I'm just going to guess. When I'm finished, I'll do complete. And then it gives me a confirmation message that I'm about to exit. All right, and then it shows me my score. Okay, so you notice here there's a couple of different things that happened. So I definitely got this question wrong. The correct answer is Anthony Rizzo. It's not Jason Hayward. But what does the pitcher do in a baseball game? When I was setting up this question, I only looked for a couple of terms. And because I didn't include both of those terms, pitcher and throw, it marked that answer incorrect. So as the teacher, I would need to make sure that all of the keywords that I want my students to have in there are shown, and that I coach them on if those keywords are part of restating this question, that they do that. But remember, I could take this test again. That's the way my teacher set it up. So if I click the back button, I have the opportunity to take it again. So I have a start button again. So I'm going to click. Add that, and then select my correct answer here, and then complete test. Confirmation message. It goes through. And again, because I didn't set this up correctly as the teacher and put in all the keywords I was looking for, it still marked that one wrong. Right? But if I go back to my sample test, I don't have the ability to look at that question and answer the test anymore. It shows me my scores here, my first attempt, and then my best attempt. And which one is going to show up in the report is the best attempt. So that's what my teacher will see on their report. They'll see all of them, but that will be the one at the top. So now what I'm going to do is log back in as a teacher so you can see what this looks like on the teacher reporting side of things. And what we saw happen there with that short answer question, that's why it's really best if you're using any type of short answer question in there that you don't use the automatic grading, because otherwise you have to put every possible spelling and phrase and misspelling of a word out there. And that can become a little frustrating for you and your students as well. So I recommend doing that as a self-grading part, or setting the test up to where it's 2 different pieces if that's what you like to use in your classroom. So if I go back to my test and my sample course, here are my tests and here's my answers. And if I go to review test, this shows me all of my questions. Again, if I wanted to look at them and make sure I need to edit them again, I could. If I want to see my student results, it automatically starts showing it here, and it shows me both of my students' attempts. And I can filter by their best attempt if I want to, or by their lowest attempt, or by a certain group as well. Groups are your different class periods if you're a secondary teacher. If I click on reports, this is where I can get more analytics and data on how my students did. So I can view overall performance or question by question statistics, right? So this gives me a poll for all of the students in my class and is helpful. The only data that's going to show up here is the student's best performance. So remember when I took this the first time, I actually, the first time I took this, I got question 2 wrong, but because I set up the test to where only my best attempt shows up here in the results, that's why this is only showing 1 correct answer when there really should be an incorrect and an incorrect. So if you want to get accurate data on student performance and you're giving them multiple attempts, then I would count all of the attempts in your reporting in your data, in your settings when you first make the test, rather than only best attempt. But if you only want to see best attempt, then that's what you can put here. And that's kind of the gist of it. Test statistics shows you overall performance as well and gives you some nice graphs and things that you can look at a little bit further. If you need to deactivate your test, maybe in between class periods or at any point during the day, you can deactivate it. And that doesn't delete any results. It just makes it so that students don't have access to it until you hide it, until you make it active again. If you send reminders to students, you can do that when it's active. It sends them a message on itslearning, not a message per se, but a notification that they have something they need to do and that this test is active and when its deadline is if you set one up. So that is how you can make a test on itslearning. And there's lots of different ways you could use them. If you want to use a test in a learning path, if you check out our learning path tutorial video, that gives you a little bit more explanation on that and how you can use tests to give students different pathways and give them different resources they might need. If you have any questions, please let us know. There's a couple of resources listed here. Some are within itslearning and have examples from classes. Others are YouTube tutorials with slideshows that are linked in the descriptions for the videos and guides. And lastly, you can reach out to me if you need help. If you want to earn PGPs, make sure that you fill out the form that was on the document where this video and slide deck was housed, and then it will be emailed to you shortly after. Thank you, and I hope I see you in itslearning training session again soon.